everyone, and welcome to this quick tutorial on Burgmüller's famous arabesque in A minor. Now, this video is not going to be geared so much towards teaching you the notes or fingerings, things like that, but it's more focusing on adding and polishing details in preparation for, say, a recital or a competition. Now, I hope that even if you don't have things 100% under your fingers just yet, you'll still stick around and maybe get some ideas that you can incorporate into your practicing as you move forward and progressing through your piece. Let's get down to business. Now, something that I hear that oftentimes people struggle with right out of the gate, as soon as the piece starts, is how to set the tempo on these first few chords. Oftentimes I'll hear that the tempo wavers a little bit, doesn't feel very confident, might speed up and slow down. Oftentimes I'll hear that people start really quickly and then realize that they can't maintain that tempo when the right hand comes in, which is something we obviously want to avoid. So how do we kind of counteract that and head that off before it even happens? What I recommend is think ahead to how fast you want to or can play the most difficult passage. And for most people, that is generally measure 12, when the left hand takes over the 16th note motive. And what I would suggest is sing those first couple measures where the left hand starts playing the 16ths in your head, da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, and feel that quarter note pulse, da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum. Now, before you start playing, I'm still feeling that quarter note pulse, and I'm going to imagine a couple of empty measures in my head before my left hand starts, and then it just joins into what's already happening. So I'm going to imagine dum, 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 dum. And then that way you'll really ensure that your tempo is really solid and you're not going to encounter anything down the road that is too fast for you to handle. Now, one other detail to pay attention to on these opening chords, and well, really throughout the entire piece when the left hand has that solid kind of pulse to it, is that you want to make certain that those chords are precisely together and that every single note has its place. So oftentimes I'll kind of hear that some of those notes are a little bit rolled, or some of the notes don't want to come out. So pay extra attention when you're practicing to ensuring that everything is precisely together and that we hear all of the notes really nicely. Just takes a bit of extra practice, but if you think about it, you won't have any problem. Now, something else to also pay attention to as you practice is the evenness of the 16th notes. And I know that for a lot of people, developing that evenness really poses a challenge, and it's something that we all struggle with as pianists. And there, of course, are a few techniques that we all know, practicing in rhythms. So for instance, long, short, long, yeah? And then reversing that, short, long, short, making certain that I'm giving the full weight of my arm onto each long note. So long, and if you notice, I'm really dropping my weight onto each one, and then I'm going to do the opposite, making sure that this is all still very relaxed. Over time, if you practice that diligently, your 16ths will really significantly improve and will have that really nice, crisp clarity that we're all dying to achieve when we're playing a 16th passage. Now, something else to pay attention to is specifically the position of your hand. And we know all our teachers are always all up in our grill about our hand position and staying flexible, where is your wrist, the shape of your fingers, etc. It's all vitally important. And it just takes years to develop. But keep thinking about things such as that curved finger, making sure that the finger joints are not collapsing, that this is all staying very relaxed, your thumb is very loose, and your wrist is in a nice straight line so we don't end up with any of that or any of that while we're trying to play. Those things will really significantly impede your velocity, accuracy, evenness, and even potentially damage your hand, which are all things, that we hope to avoid. But in terms of hand position, a couple things to think about that will certainly help your 16th evenness and just playing in general. Now, I want to make sure that as I play, these knuckles, the bridge of my hand knuckles, are going to always, 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 and remember when we say always in music, that means 96% of the time. Obviously, there will always be exceptions, but generally speaking, this is what you're aiming for, is that these knuckles, again, the bridge of your hand, will stay parallel to the key surface. I'm going to try to avoid any tilting like that. So at first, what it will feel like before you become accustomed to it is that you're turning a little bit in. But that's what we're aiming for. The reason for this is that we want to make certain that whatever finger is playing is able to go straight down into the key and not kind of like be playing glancing off like this. Yeah, so it can really support the weight of the arm. And if we have this, if you notice, the weight of my arm is kind of aiming over here and not going straight down, which is what we really hope for. So if I'm here, it can really support my arm weight. Yeah, so that's one reason for that, among many others. But if you find that while you're playing they're tilting, just go ahead and yoink, turn that sucker in towards your thumb a little bit. It'll feel a little funny at first again, but just keep thinking about it, and over time it'll just feel natural. Now, something to pay attention to as you are being really cognizant of that bridge position is that in order to achieve it, we are going to try to avoid bringing your elbow up. So this is still all going to hang very naturally off of your shoulder, and I just have this motion rather than this. Yeah? Easier said than done for sure. But if you think about that, then automatically these 16ths will become a lot clearer and a lot easier to play. So if you notice, straight bridge, not this, yeah? Nice and even, yeah? Now another thing to think about, and I'm sure your teachers have all talked about it, and to my students, you know I'm always harping on it, but as you play, you want to make sure that your elbow is leading your hand. So a good example of this is as I play these 16th notes going up, I'm not just merely relying on my fingers to play it. It's much harder to so hard, it's really uncomfortable. But I let my arm take it to the side so that I'm really ensuring that whatever finger is playing will be in a straight line to my elbow. And again, my elbow is going to lead. So if we imagine that I'm playing this part, da 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 da, my elbow is actually moving in this direction. So da 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 da, yeah? And throughout all of this passage, that's what you're going to aim for, is that you keep that bridge really parallel and you let your arm take you over so that by the time I arrive at my fifth finger playing, my elbow is in a perfectly straight line with that 5. So it's just moving really nice and gradually over. So those couple things will really help with the evenness of the 16ths. Something else to really pay attention to, and when people are first working on this piece, I often find that once the right hand joins in measure 3, if you notice, Burgmüller has it marked as legato. Something to avoid is letting the right hand legato impact the articulation of your left hand. Oftentimes I'll hear that people have a really beautiful staccato with a lot of energy, and it's very ominous and scherzando on the first 2 measures. Then when the right hand joins in with the legato, all of a sudden we end up with the left hand being sort of influenced by that and becomes much heavier and longer all of a sudden. We want to maintain that same nice, crisp, energetic staccato on the left hand, even though the right hand is playing legato. So it's really a nice kind of etude in letting each hand do 2 different things, yeah? So what to avoid? All of a sudden that left hand getting long. Really strive to have it stay really, really the same articulation throughout when you have that chordal figure. Now, something that I find that is really nice to bring out is when we get to the second line around measure 7, to really exaggerate that all of a sudden this right hand becomes really, really cantabile. And it's such a nice moment that all of a sudden it's become major. The sun is beaming through these ominous clouds that we've had in A minor up to this point. So I think it's really nice to bring out that all of a sudden things are a bit different here. And the way that I would really recommend doing that is focusing on your articulation, particularly in the right hand at this point. So what we've had up till now is that everything has a very crisp and very staccato feel, particularly on the left hand. But even the right hand 16th that we've played up till now generally will have a very fast attack, so they have a lot of energy. What do we mean by attack speed? The attack speed is how quickly the key travels down, and you can vary that. So you might play with slow attacks, you might play with fast attacks, and that is independent of tempo. You can play a slow tempo with fast attacks, yeah, which has a very energetic sound to it. You can play the same tempo with slow attacks, and all of a sudden it has a bit more legato nature, a bit more mellow kind of sound. So always be thinking how you can vary the attack speed. It just adds that extra element of interest to your playing. This place, I would really lean towards playing the right hand with slow attacks so that the legato becomes even more cantabile, even more legatissimo, just to really have a bit of variety. Variety is the spice of life in life. Variety is the spice of life in music as well. So really, anywhere that you can bring little differences to your playing is really, really important. So when we get to this place, if I play with fast attacks, it sounds nice, but I'm going to really go for it to be even more dramatically different. Really, really cantabile. You can hear the difference so that the legato adds just a bit more depth to it, and again, a bit of variety to the sound. Now, something else to pay attention to in this place that I love when students bring it out is in measure 8, beat 2 on the right hand, he has an accent somewhat unexpectedly. And anytime that you encounter something in music that is somewhat unexpected, try to really draw the listener's attention to it. Composers often put little things in there that are surprises, and it really helps keep us focused on the performance when we're listeners. So in this place, I think it's such a nice special thing to accent beat 2, just like he says. Yeah, just that little sparkle on that note is so special. I think that it's really important to pay extra special attention to a couple details in the first and second ending here before we go on to the B section with the left-hand 16th notes. Oftentimes I'll hear that people, I think because they anticipate the 16ths on the left hand coming up and are a little nervous about it, they tend to sort of hurry through the first and second endings here and don't pay them the extra special attention that I think that they deserve. So a couple little things to look out for. It's worth noting that on beat 2 of the first ending, Burgmüller again gives us that somewhat unexpected accent. Yeah, it's very similar to measure 8. And in this case, even more than an accent, he has written a sforzando, so a very almost aggressive articulation here. And I think that it really helps us kind of propel back into the repeat. So what I oftentimes will hear is that the beat 2 of the first ending E octave sometimes feels a little bit lazy, little lackadaisical, because I think people are kind of mentally jumping ahead to, okay, I have to repeat now, things like that. I think that it's really important to pay really careful attention to the release of this chord. Oftentimes as pianists, I think we're especially guilty of only thinking about the articulations of our notes, the very beginnings of the notes, and then just sort of leaving the middle and the ends of those notes to just like do their own thing. And we have that luxury as pianists because the note will just hold whether we think about it or not. Whereas if you play oboe or violin, you have to consciously be thinking about sustaining a note, which in turn sort of leads to an awareness of how a note ends, which we unfortunately are able to just disregard, but I think to our detriment. So make sure you're always paying attention to how things release. And I think that's especially important in this place. So oftentimes I'll hear that this chord just sort of peters out and goes back to the repeat, and it loses a sense of the urgency and the energy. I like to hear that chord just ba, yeah, just on its own, have that explosion of sound before we repeat back to the piano 16ths. So, yeah, so I've got something else to listen out for that people often fall into the trap of is playing legato from that. That's not what he wrote, and I think that it's just that little detail is really, really nice. So really try to let that just end, and then we come back, but without losing the momentum. So, Yeah, I think it's so nice. Now, same sorts of things to pay attention to in the second ending. Again, the release on beat 2 I think is really important, and that's a place that oftentimes people neglect to pay attention to. So oftentimes I'll hear that one hand or the other sort of outlasts the other one. So what do I mean? Oftentimes I'll hear that maybe the right hand is really paying nice attention to the fact that it's staccato, but then the left hand doesn't really match that release. And I think that to maintain the energy and the excitement, they need to both release simultaneously. So I think is really, really important there. Another thing to pay attention to is really feeling the energy of the slur on the right hand there. So oftentimes people will play, yeah, and it's right, but I think that we can improve it a little bit by maintaining sort of the sense of almost that it's crescendoing to the high C. So, ba-dum, yeah. So it's a nice sparkle there instead of a ba-dum, yeah. So just really try to think, almost for me, I think of a trombone sliding up to that note, like brum, yeah, so that it really has a lot of intent to it, rather than just playing our fingers and then already thinking about what's coming on. Stay with the notes that you're playing, and I think they'll have a lot more vitality. And now on to the B section, where the left-hand 16ths take over. Everybody's most feared part of this piece, at least in my experience. Everybody's a little bit worried about these 16th notes all speaking evenly, things being really clear. Don't worry, if you practice carefully and diligently, over time it will develop and you won't have to worry about it. So how do we go about tackling these left-hand 16th notes? Well, the same way that we suggested with the right-hand 16th notes in the previous passage. Make sure that when you're practicing, your knuckles are staying parallel to the keys, so that again, those fingers are going directly straight down into the key, and really making sure that your arm is leading you through those notes so that it is again directly over whatever finger is playing, yeah? And also, again, practicing in the rhythms, the long, short, long, long, etc. Those things, while they're not an immediate cure for slightly uneven 16th notes, they will go a long ways towards taking you on your journey to beautifully even 16th note playing. So just stick with it, be patient. It takes a minute to get there, but it will get there if you're persistent and conscientious about it. So that's enough to talk about the 16ths. It's not rocket science, it's just hard work. Now, in this place, the right hand, I think it's such a nice moment. Whereas we had in the previous passage when the right hand was playing the 16th notes, the left hand was keeping that really crisp staccato, yeah? In this place, now we have both hands playing really legato. And I think that this right hand passage here in measure 12 it can learn a lot from what we did in measure 7 in terms of the slow attacks and the slight overlap of the keys so that it has that really nice cantabile. A couple things to look out for and little traps that people sometimes will fall into if they're not careful. Be careful that the right hand legato does not influence the left hand articulations. What do I mean? Measure 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. If you notice, the last note of each of those left hand groups there is marked staccato, and he has an eighth rest after it. Oftentimes, because the right hand is taking so much of our attention in terms of the beautiful singing legato, people will neglect to observe the fact that we need that staccato energy on the last 16th, yeah? Yeah? So really just be aware of that while you're practicing and it'll take care of itself. Just listen out for it. Make sure that you aren't falling into the trap of playing that last note really overly long. Sometimes I'll hear people play it almost like quarters. So just an awareness and everything will snap into focus, I'm sure. Now, something else that oftentimes I find that when students are playing this for me, they have a bit of trouble with. Things get a bit wobbly at this point. And the place that I'm talking about is in measure 18 and 19. We're talking about the diminuendo and the poco rallentando in this place. if you're not sure what it means, a rallentando is the same thing as a retard, same thing as a ritenuto, same thing as a ritardando, same thing as a cede if we're playing French music. They all mean that you're slowing down. And it's really important to think of it in terms of slowing down rather than I'm just slower. Oftentimes I'll hear people when they see retard or a rallentando, all of a sudden they play slower. But the very beginning of a rallentando should still be in the same tempo as what came before. It means that you're getting slower. So rather than slamming on the brake, we're just letting off the gas pedal and sort of coasting into a slower tempo, if that makes sense. So what's an easy way to help make sure that our retard is really proportional? Oftentimes I'll hear when people play, how's it go? That they slow down, but it gets a little disjointed, and it's not, again, really proportionally slowing down. Well, a really handy way to make sure that it's dialed in just perfectly is to subdivide. What does subdivide mean? It means that I'm breaking the rhythmic values into a smaller one. So in this place, Burgmüller has written eighth notes. So if I want to make sure that I'm slowing down really smoothly, I will start thinking in 16th notes in this place. Obviously, if you are thinking in a smaller time frame, it's easier to gauge if you're slowing down really smoothly. So rather than trying to just think da 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 da, yeah, which is an all right rallentando, but I think I can be even more precise. I'm going to, again, subdivide, start thinking in my head in 16ths. So it's going to be da 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 da. So da 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 da. And it's a lot easier to make sure that you're slowing down really smoothly and gradually. A really special moment in this piece that I think it really behooves us to take full advantage of is at measure 24, where he has marked all of a sudden dolce, subito piano. So we're suddenly very sweet and quiet. So it's this really marked contrast to this stormy 16th, virtuosic, flashy material. And then all of a sudden, for just the span of really 3 measures, he really wants us to change the character and the color of it into something just more introspective and very cantabile. So anything you can do to really bring that out, I think, will serve the piece really well. So again, I think some of the things that will help with that, slightly slower attacks on the right hand so that we have that nice overlapping legato. And even you might experiment with just touching that left pedal just a tiny bit to just really kiss it with the una corda so that it just gets a slightly different timbre. Depends on the instrument, depends on your taste, but something to experiment with maybe. But I think that it's really nice. We have this, and then just really that little quick respite for 3 measures of just going, again, more inwards so that it's got a bit more of that self-reflection, I think, for that time. And then I think it's really important to maintain that character through the very first group of 16th at the end. So we've got the second ending is still just a little bit in that, and then it goes, yeah, so we've really got that really, again, big sense of variety in articulations and characters and colors even. Now, something else that's worth noting is that in the very last measure, the next to last measure of this piece, he has marked risoluto. So very resolutely on these last 16ths that we hear. And it's worth noting that previously in the piece, he has, under the very first group of 16ths that we see, written leggero, so very lightly. So it's got a bit more fleeting, scherzando feel. And then here at the very end, it's just like a statement. So very passante even. So we've got a lot of weight. Make sure you're playing all the way down to the bottom of the keys on these, so that it's got a bit more heft to it than we have seen on the 16ths previously. I think it's a nice way to round the piece out. Now, one word about the last chord. It's worth noting that he has, over this last measure, written a fermata. And oftentimes when students play a piece for me where there's a fermata over the last chord, they're very diligent about observing it and tend to hold it for, forever. It just feels so good to hold that chord out. Now, I tell everybody that you should hold a fermata not for any specific set amount of time, obviously longer than the rhythm is notated for, but I think that it's important to keep in mind good taste, and it depends on the context of where the fermata is written. So in this place, I think that it's really helpful in order to judge how long you want this last chord to be, to think about how much the note is decaying. So obviously you want the energy to continue into the silence here. And if you tend to hold it a little bit too long, the note will have decayed away in terms of the sound so much that we'll lose that vitality in the sound. So I would recommend not holding the last chord for too long, but again, I think a helpful tip that will help you gauge how long to hold it is when we were talking in the second ending about thinking of a crescendo on ba-yum. Yeah, I think that on this very last chord, it's helpful to imagine, even though it's not physically possible to do on the piano, to imagine a crescendo through the release of that note so that we maintain the energy all the way into the silence after the piece. So, yeah, rather than just... One has a lot more vitality, and the other one leaves us kind of unexcited at the end. Well, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and hopefully you've gotten some helpful tips out of it. If you're interested in some one-on-one coaching, I'd love to hear you. Just click on the description, and you'll find a link to my website. Certainly easy to contact directly through that. Thanks again, and until next time, happy practicing.